So let's focus then for a moment on Dick Cheney, who applied for, and I've talked about this, received 5 draft deferments because, as he said, I had other priorities in the 60s than military service. And his priorities were primarily amassing political power and money. It's not hard, it's sort of hard to make a difference between these two sometimes. Before he became vice president, he was chairman of the board and CEO of Halliburton, which I've now talked about a couple of times. This is his oil exploration firm. And he, unlike the Trump family, stepped down from his office, but he brought some $40 billion to Halliburton through Kellogg Brown and Root, which was one of its subsidiaries. So it turned out that Halliburton and Kellogg Brown and Root, which I talked about before, actually were connected, and Dick Cheney was pushing money and through as defense contracts into their coffers as fast as he possibly could, to the tune of $40 billion. What the Pentagon did with this money was buy another army, basically, this unofficial army. So you've got the National Guard, but then you also have the military contractors, or as I've talked about, the private military contractors, PMCs. Private military contractors have blossomed in number in the last 20 years. They were already there, but there weren't that many jobs for them necessarily, and they tended to be in places like Africa, Sierra Leone, the Congo, really tough places to live. It's just war-torn, as they say, in the war-torn Congo to the blah, blah, blah. But this is a whole different thing. This is the creation of companies like that I've talked about before, Titan, Catchy, Triple Canopy, MPRI, which is MPRI is just it's its own military effectively. So you can hire whole armies of a couple of thousand people, right? And they bring with them their own gear, like they have their own machines, and they're not borrowing your stuff. They got their own stuff. They got their tanks. They've got their own stuff, and they have them shipped, to wherever it's going to be, or they rent them from you, or they lease them from somebody else. They're mercenary firms. Most soldiers hired from these people have been trained by the U.S. military, right? So they've taken honorable discharges. They may have been discharged as sergeants or lieutenants, captains, or sometimes soldiers. Which is very common. They walk across the road and they're hired. So if they're making, say, $30,000 working for the military, working for the United States Army, and the Army says, okay, this is how much money you're worth to us, plus we're paying for your room and board. That's totals $50,000, which is their story. You walk across the road and you get hired at MPRI, and they'll say, well, you're worth, sergeant, gunnery sergeant, we're delighted to have you, guns. We're prepared to pay you $180,000 a year to go and work for us wherever we say. And you're like, yeah, I'll sign up for that. $180,000 to $200,000 a year, that's not bad. Why would you stay in the forces when you can make that kind of money? So you say to your friends, hey, check this out. You should get out of the Army and come work for us. And so your whole squad starts to work for MPRI and so on. Literally billions of dollars are now pushed directly into the private sector by people like Dick Cheney specifically, often with no oversight, little or no oversight. And there's a no tender basis. So that means that typically when you want a job done, you put it out for tender, government tender. This is the same thing. We do the same thing in Canada. Most governments do this. In fact, all companies that want to solve a problem, usually you do this. Even if let's say you want to fix your roof. You say, you go to 3 different roofers and you say, what's your price to fix this roof? They're like, let me come and look. And they look and they're like, let me estimate. Yeah, $3,000. And the next person says, $6,000. You're like, $6,000? Whoa, what are you going to put it on? Like, you're going to put on a gold roof? And they're like, no, because here, see, we have to do this and that. And you're like, oh, I like the fact that you're very thorough. That's good. And the next person says, $4,500. You're like, $4,500. And you're like, what? Why? It's like, well, because you're like, yeah, okay, you've got some of this. You're not a Cadillac. You're not $6,000. You're not $3,000. Okay, I like you. So you take that person's estimate. A tender is the same thing. So you put out to the forces and you say, we need to build secure this, secure the military situation in Tikrit. What's it going to cost? And you put that out to tender. And people say, "Ooh," and they look at the job and they send people off the ground and they go for essentially do reconnaissance, and they come back and they say, "Oh, that's going to cost $10 million." Like $10 million, fine. So you put in a tender that says $10 million, and the government looks at this and says, "Okay." Titan says $10 million. Catchy says $20 million. Okay, and this $100,000, we don't want them. Forget that. So you call up the $20 million guys and you say, "Why does it cost $20 million?" So they, "Oh, because of it," and they put together a big thick quotation for you. So well, no, right? It's a tender. That's a tender, right? No, because Cheney's like, "We're just going to give you the job. Here you go. Kellogg Brown and Root, you now have the job. Here you go. No tender." So a no tender basis means that you are given a contract. So it's like me calling one of you and saying, "I have a job for you," and you're like, "Okay," and I'm like, "I'm going to pay you $20,000 in the next month to write an article for me," and you're like, $20,000? Jesus, that's a good deal. Okay, all right, Tim, I'll take your money. Well, why me? It's like, well, you're a good writer. I just think you're the right person for the job. Boom. It's like, what? How did that happen? This is not how business is done. And this, ironically, is from the people who say they're business people. They're like, "Oh, yeah, we're all about business." Of all the money that was spent, the estimates that are generally, there were another 150,000 troops in Iraq on the ground, American troops. These are reliable estimates. That during those years, so you've got 150,000 American troops on the ground with the U.S. military, and another 150,000 mercenaries on the ground as private military contractors, PMCs. And in this way, the Bush White House is able to fight a much bigger, much more expensive and expansive war, really twice the size of what it was officially on the books. And these private military contractors don't have embeds. So they don't have reporters going along with them because they're not on the books. So they're not really even there. So when you get somebody like, "Well, who are you?" You're like, "Oh, I don't say." So, in fact, Blackwater got into hot water, so to speak, because a Blackwater unit is supposed to have killed, and I'm sure they did, I think it was 23. I will put this up here. My memory is that it was 23 people. Of course, the number fluctuated because they were like, "No, it was only 17. It's like, okay, whatever. But Blackwater they were known to be cowboys. So an early Eric Prince's private military contracting firm called Blackwater. And there's a book about it by Jeremy Scahill. And Scahill he's a maverick, but I think that was good work. His second book, Dirty Wars. Okay, I like Scahill in general. He's taken a lot of flack, but I think the Blackwater book it really holds up. And there was a lot invested in having people say, And I think Dirty Wars is really good too. They produced a documentary from it as well. There is a documentary about Blackwater. I think it's just called Blackwater. I'll find it for you. Because sometimes it's easier just to see a documentary and go, "Oh, okay." Which is why I'm recommending Iraq for Sale, because it's a picture of the whole industry. So in this way, you can fight and go on fighting, and it's not on the books, and so it's a hidden. This is why I'm calling this section Hidden War. Okay, all right, that's that for this.